lanes, I've been driving this train. Years in this lane, there's no stopping this flame. Cause I came to the game and I changed it to play how I like, rearranged it to my own domain. Yeah, I got what it takes, made lots of mistakes.
Of many power rankings, we are going to do this probably about every 3 to 4 races. I figured 3 was a pretty good time here because we've had 3 really good rounds of the Formula One season so far. We've had Bahrain, we've had Saudi Arabia, and then just most recently we had Australia. So I figured it's about time to go through and give out my power rankings, who I think are some of the best drivers, who I think some are the worst drivers, who I think maybe needs to, potentially, pick it up a step. So I'm going to try to go in particular order, so just keep that in mind. So we're going to start at the very bottom. I'm going to try to breeze through the bottom of my power rankings, and then we'll move. When I get closer to the top, we'll have a little bit more of a discussion about those. So as you can see here on the screen here, building a tier list, but this will serve as our power rankings. So starting off at number 20, and I consider this more of an incomplete than anything else. Is Sebastian Vettel. Obviously, Australia was his first race back, so, we weren't really sure what to expect. Unfortunately, Aston Martin really had some major issues there in Australia, so it just didn't work out well. So then number 19, I'm going to be putting Nicholas Latifi as my number 19 driver. And I've said this before, and I probably even said it on a live stream at some point. I'm starting to become very questionable of whether or not he deserves to be in F1. The fact that Alex Albon has been able to pick up this car almost immediately, whereas Latifi has had massive amount of issues, crashed out of the race in Jeddah, basically was absolutely nowhere in Australia, and Bahrain he was absolutely nowhere. So right now, I would consider him at the very bottom of my power rankings because I don't count Sebastian Vettel literally having one weekend so far. Then moving on to number 18, I'm putting Lance Stroll, and this you can kind of get the feeling with apparently it doesn't allow. There we go. So with Lance Stroll, we've seen the issues he's had. He was able to fight himself back up, near the points in Australia, but he was doing it by some very questionable, moves, swerving up and, back and forth on the straights. He did have a 5-second time penalty for doing that. He crashed Latifi out of qualifying for whatever reason he did that. But he just really hasn't shown a whole bunch as far as potential, skill that's going to be able to drag the Aston Martin, which, let's be honest, it's a crap car right now. I just don't see Lance Stroll being the guy that's going to be able to drag that car back up into the points on a consistent basis. All right, so moving on to the 15 to 17 tier. Now it's weird, but this is where it started to get a little bit difficult for me, as I had to really put in some thought as far as to, who was going to go in these positions. It's really difficult because, any of these, a lot of these drivers, could legitimately fit into any one of these tiers. So number 17, and I hate doing this to Haas, but I'm going to put Mick Schumacher down in 17th. For right now, don't get me wrong, he had a really good race in Australia, just finished a little bit outside of the points, which is exactly what Haas is wanting. Australia really wasn't a track for Haas, but obviously he didn't race in Saudi Arabia, and he finished way behind his teammate Kevin Magnussen in Bahrain, and so I'm interested to see what he's going to be able to do in Imola. Is it going to be more of the same where he's just not matching up to Kevin Magnussen well? Or are we going to start to see like what we saw in Australia where he's going to be able to fight for, the back end of the points, or, if it's a track that Haas is really good at, maybe he's fighting for mid fifth to seventh place points. So interested to see. Right now, I've got him at my 17th position. Moving on to number 16. I hate doing this to him as well because I think he's shown some promise this year, is going to be Yuki Tsunoda. I just think right now he lost his car in Jeddah. They literally tried to go out to the grid and his car basically blew up. He did relatively well in Bahrain, but then in Australia he really was far behind his teammate Pierre Gasly, and so I'm wondering how he was that far off throughout the race weekend in Australia. All right, so my number 15. God, this is really difficult. But my number 15, I'm going to put Alex Albon there at my number 15 right now. Granted, he had a fantastic race. He deserves the Tire Whisperer moniker from Australia. Did absolutely amazing. But one race does not make a whole season. And unfortunately, as we've seen, Alex Albon has had his issues. Obviously, Bahrain, the Williams car was absolutely nowhere. Bottom of the field, 2 laps down. In Jeddah, crashes out Lance Stroll there. Wasn't able to finish the race. And then, granted, great job in Australia. But again, one race does not make your whole season. So then moving on to the 11 to 14 range. This is where we're going to start getting really difficult, and I can already see, people, these are my rankings, so just bear with me. So my number 11 driver is Guan Yu Zhou, or sorry, my number 14 driver is Guan Yu Zhou. He's showing some promise, don't get me wrong. So I want to preface that, first and foremost, but just hasn't, he's been on that edge of getting points, and I can very well see with the way that the Alfa Romeo has been racing all season long, I can see him starting to push for more and more points, but I need to see that consistency out of him, and I didn't necessarily see that in Australia. My number 13. This is where McLaren. I'm gonna preface this by saying yes. I'm gonna put both McLaren drivers in here at 13 and 12. And Lando Norris is ahead of Daniel Ricciardo. But here's the thing that I think, and this is the same thing that I used just a second ago with Alex Albon. McLaren was absolutely nowhere the first 2 races of the season. I mean, they were literally fighting midfield to bottom of the pack in both Bahrain and Jeddah. And then all of a sudden they had a great race, which obviously Australia suited their car very well. And so, yes, they were able to finish 4th and 5th, 5th and 6th in Australia. And congratulations, I'm glad you were able to get some points, but I'm just a little iffy on whether or not the McLaren, if this just wasn't one of those one-off type deals. And I'll be real interested to see if they can carry that over into Imola, because then if they can carry it over into Imola, maybe they have solved some of their issues. But even in interviews, Lando Norris has said, this car is not fixed by any stretch of the imagination. So then moving on to number 11. So we're getting towards the top end of the points here. And I would say that my number 11 is going to be, I'm going to say Kevin Magnussen here. Here's the thing: is Kevin Magnussen has done a fantastic job with Haas Formula One team and getting this car to where it needs to be. I'm like I've said in the video when I broke the news, I think this was a welcome addition to the team. This was going to definitely help, bring the car along, be able to develop the car throughout the season. We saw in Australia they were having some issues. Their pace seemed to be absolutely nowhere. But even in interviews, Kevin Magnussen said that they kind of fell behind the 8 ball when it came to the setup of the car. They just had their issues trying to get their setup, set exactly correctly the way they would have wanted it in Australia. But, I mean, he's scoring points almost on a regular basis. Came really, really close in Australia. I think had they not had the kind of snafu when safety cars came out and when they changed tires, I think he would have probably been fighting for points when it all looked lost earlier in the weekend. All right, so moving on to the top 10. This is the top 10. So my number 10 driver, I think right now doing an absolutely amazing job in the Alfa Romeo. I'm going with Valtteri Bottas. Probably could put him a little bit higher here, but I still feel like there are some drivers that are consistently performing. And really, if you looking at the last 9 drivers that we have here, there's a lot of interchangeable, except when you get obviously to the top. But there's a lot of interchangeable parts here, and I think Valtteri Bottas has done a fantastic job in the Alfa Romeo. I want to see if he can keep it up, but so far, I mean, it's going to be really hard. Top 10, he's got my number 10 spot. So my number 9 spot, and I'm absolutely sure that I'm going to hear it from these fans with what I'm going to do here. But my number 9 is going to be Max Verstappen. And before you guys all get in a huff and a puff here, the reason why Max is right now in my number 9 is because the very first race of the season, he doesn't even finish. He retires 3 laps from the end. Yes, he was running second place, but in the championship, last place doesn't get you points. Then in Jeddah, he gets a victory. Well-needed victory for Red Bull. But then in Australia, reliability hits Red Bull again and causes him to retire again. And, again, retirements don't get you points. And right now, he is falling further and further behind, more with the reliability issues at Red Bull. I mean, it's really hurting his championship chances. And, especially with them just signing him to this new long-term deal, Max has got to be fuming as far as why they're having the reliability issues they are, when really reliability was never an issue with Red Bull and with Honda last season. Then moving on to number 8, I've got Esteban Ocon. Has done an absolutely amazing job so far with Alpine. Has gotten them, further and further up the field than I even imagined. I mean, if you go back to the video that I talked about, the rankings for each team, I had Alpine down at the bottom. And, I mean, that may all still come to fruition. We're only 3 races in, but I think Esteban's done a really good job. Has been able to take the fight to Fernando Alonso and to some of the racers up in the front. So I'm very promised to see that Esteban is showing talent, showing, that potentially it wasn't just a fluke that he was able to win last season. My number 7 slot, I've got Pierre Gasly. I mean, he's done an amazing job with AlphaTauri. If Red Bull does not keep Sergio Perez past this season and they let Sergio go, if Pierre doesn't get the Red Bull seat going into 2023, it's an absolute travesty. And I think any one of the Formula One teams that, potentially have a seat open would absolutely die to have Pierre Gasly. Because, I mean, he's just shown that he can race this car so amazingly. He's been able to put AlphaTauri in positions that typically you wouldn't see this team in with everything they've done in seasons past. So I've got him as my number 7. My number 6, I've got Fernando Alonso. Yes, he had a pretty torrid race this past weekend in Australia with the medium tires just not working for him and almost burning out, 10 laps in to having him on his car. But he had 2 really good results, one really good result in Bahrain, and then, in Saudi Arabia, literally only had the fact that, the hydraulics went out on him and had to retire the car there. Had the Alpine up in the top 4 up until that safety car. And this is another one of those ones that the safety car really, I think, ruined what potentially could have been a really good finish by Fernando in this race. But I've still got him in my number 6 slot. Now moving on to top 5. My number 5 racer, and I know there's going to be, I'm going to piss a lot of people off. Lewis Hamilton is my number 5 right now. He's had some really good results where Mercedes wasn't expected to have these results. And so I think being able to, you know, have a hand in basically getting Mercedes to be the second best team in Formula One right now has been an absolute blessing. When even if you talk to George Russell and Hamilton, they both say that, you know, this car is absolutely, you know, they still haven't been able to figure out the issues with porpoising. They're not bringing updates till after Imola now. And, you know, so to be able to have their car where it's been, I give it to them. I put him at my number 5. My number 4 is George Russell. George Russell has done an amazing job with this car. I think, you know what? I'm changing my mind. I had George Russell on my number 4. I'm taking him out. At number 4, I'm putting Carlos Sainz, and this is a little bit sad because I like Carlos Sainz as a driver. He typically does really well. Absolutely stunk it up in Australia. It was absolutely just, I don't know what happened. But on Australia, absolutely just junked it up. It hurt him really bad. Had 2 really good results before then. Had he done something amazing in Australia, he would have been easily top 3. My number 3 is George Russell. Doing absolute bits with the Mercedes and the way this car has been so far at the start of the season, not being able to figure out the porpoising issue, you know, basically having a slower car, having to fight the likes of, you know, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri, Haas, you know, they were fighting those guys constantly at the, you know, in the midfield. For George Russell to be able to do what he's done with this car has been nothing short of amazing. And I think it goes to prove that, you know, this is why Mercedes had him in their Young Drivers Academy. Why they expected to, you know, basically have him go on to be the, you know, one of the Mercedes drivers is this right here, showing talent when, you know, the car may not be at its top best. So, number 3, George Russell. Then moving on to number 2 is Sergio Perez, which obviously means Charles Leclerc is my number 1. Sergio Perez, for everything that has gone wrong with Red Bull, Sergio Perez has been able to keep his head upon his shoulders, you know, just drive his race. And yes, when we heard some of the radio calls in Australia where he said, you know, what happened to Max's car? Am I going to have to worry about that? And they told him no. He was able to finish in 2nd place. Yes, it was, you know, 10 to 15 seconds behind Leclerc. But, you know, when you see a car that has had reliability issues, and it has a reliability issue here, you know, it's one of those things that's quite scary. And for him to be able to put out the results that he's put out so far, you know, obviously that him having to retire in Bahrain, but then able to come back, get a pole position in Jeddah, was able to get 4th place after his team kind of not really screwed him, but I mean, unfortunately, it was just unfortunate circumstances in Jeddah, I think. Otherwise, I think he'd have won that race. And then to Australia to finish 2nd, absolutely fantastic. And obviously that means number 1 is Charles Leclerc. I mean, what can you say? What can't you not say that Charles hasn't done already? 2 race wins out of 3. Was really close to starting off the season 3 for 3 in the win column. So, I mean, two first and a second. How does anybody have an argument that Charles Leclerc is not the number 1 driver? So, guys, Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let me know. Am I way off with some of these rankings? Am I spot on? Let me know down in the comment section down below. Guys, subscribe to my channel if you guys are new. Got Formula One content coming out all the time. I'm doing race recaps, race previews. You know, there's going to be so much more coming out on the channel. You know, we've got Formula One Manager that's going to be coming out for the PC, and I have a feeling I'm going to start a series on that as well for you guys. But subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Slap a like on this video for me. And for the American F1 fan, I'm Eric Ringle. We will see you later.
Ice in my veins, I've been driving this train. Years in this lane, there's no stopping this flame.